To me, like, in the 15 years that you've been doing this job, if you could say in one sentence what's changed, what would it be? And I always say the same thing. I say, we used to tell people and now we ask them, and it's simple as that, really.
Thank you for coming tonight, having a chat with me. We'll get started. So we've got Lee with us today, sharing your story being an ADI. So how are you?
Very good, Josh. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Looking forward to this one. Looks like we've got some interesting topics to cover, and hopefully a lot of help for people out there who are already driving instructors or lining up for the part 3. So can you tell me a little bit about, I guess, your story as a driving instructor, how long you've been doing it, and how you've got to where you are now in the industry? That'd be good.
Well, yeah, I've been an ADI just coming on 15 years. So 15 years in September. So more like 17 years if you add in my qualification time as well. I've been an ADI trainer for a while as well. Over the last couple of years, I've been doing that full time. So I do miss learners, but I don't get to work with them anymore, which is sort of good and bad, I suppose. Some days it's the best thing ever, and sometimes it's like, oh, I kind of miss that. So yeah, I sort of train instructors online and in the car for standards check preparation, for part 3 training, for part 3 exam prep. I do coaching sessions as well. So yeah, a little bit of everything kind of in the car and on Zoom. But yeah, I sort of, like I said, I've been an ADI for 15 years, and I was, as we said kind of before we started recording, I've probably made every mistake possible in that 15 years, and kind of learned from it, which is kind of how human beings learn, I suppose, if they're allowed to. And unfortunately, within our industry, we perhaps don't let them do it wrong and then reflect and then learn. There is an element of our industry that still is about, I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to listen and follow. But we're not genetically wired to learn that way. So I think my own journey is very much, how it should be, which is, you screw up, you learn from it, and then you find better and more effective ways of doing things. And then you go forward. And I've certainly made loads of mistakes along the way, definitely.
So I know we've got a few things we want to cover, but I found that interesting then. Allow the mistakes to happen, and learn from them. But you said we can't do it in this industry.
I said we don't do it. I said we don't do it.
We don't. There we go. So we don't do it in this industry. Why not?
I think it's just kind of, we tend to, even, as a trainer of modern instructors, the key message that I need to get across to PDIs is that regardless of how you were taught to drive, things have changed since then, and you can't go about a lesson by teaching someone in the way that you like to teach. We have a kind of a learning bias as human beings. So the way that we like to learn personally becomes our default teaching style. And when it doesn't match the learner, we point the finger of blame outwards and go, well, they're slow then. They're a slow learner, they're stupid then. But if you're not teaching them in the way that they like to learn, then they're going to learn despite you, not because of you, which is the reason why, that happens. I mean, a really good example was during COVID when we stopped working for 9 months. And I don't know if everyone that's going to listen to this / watch this is aware of this fact, because it's very embarrassing. It's one of our secrets that we don't like to tell everyone. But the pass rate didn't go down when mum and dad took over our jobs for 9 months. That's embarrassing, isn't it? And people always say to me, like, why did it not just go down? And it's because, what they lack in are, the knowledge that we have. They're not trained to be driving instructors, but they know their kid and they know how they tick and they know how they work. So what they lack in knowledge of doing the job, they made up for by coaching them, which is kind of how we are kind of wired to learn. The way we've always done the job is just tell, and tell people how to do it. And, in 2011, and kind of 2013, 2014, when the new standards check came out, the new part 3, that came out based on this study into road deaths and why there's so many people dying on our roads. And the findings were pretty shocking. That it basically said that if you teach people by verbal lecturing them, if you just talk at them, then they're likely to remember just 5% of what you've said long term. So the way that you've done this job for decades, which is throwing muck at a wall and hoping that it sticks, and if it doesn't, then throw more muck, don't really work very well. But that's the way we've always done it. So I think that was kind of my problem. That, I mean, I've been doing this job for kind of 6 years. Yeah, 6 years. Yeah, 6 years when it all changed to coaching and client-centered learning. And it couldn't have changed at a worse time for me personally, because as instructors, it's very easy to kind of believe your own hype. You're in your car, your learner doesn't know what you're doing is right from wrong. They don't know. They're just learning to drive, so they think you're brilliant. And it's so easy to believe your own hype. And in 2013, I had my year of no fails. So my invincible year, that I like to call it. So when all this stuff, all the new stuff came out, all the changes, all the clients said, you've got to do it this client-centered way now. You've got to use coaching now. I was like, I don't. Why do I need to change? Because I'm brilliant. And so I didn't take on any new information. I didn't change the way I worked. I didn't make my lessons client-centered. I didn't use coaching techniques because I don't need to change because I'm brilliant. Until my first standards check came 3 years later. And I went on the lesson, and we did the lesson, and I thought it was great. And me and the learner were laughing in the car park afterwards, and she was going, "Oh, I bet you've got an A grade." I'm like, "Yeah, is it?" And then they came out and said I'd failed. So that was like a massive shock to the system. But because I believe my own hype and because I'm brilliant, I didn't take any notice of it. I just thought, without swearing, that examiner maybe is not a nice person, and I'll go and do it in a different test center 30 miles away with a different examiner. I don't need to change. And then I did it again. And I failed again. So then, and then that's when the panic sets in. So, in what I do now in my role of kind of this PDI doctor thing that I've set up, the majority of people I deal with are people that are in that situation now. So they've got to the point where they failed twice and they're panicking. And for me, it was terrifying because I love doing this job. This is what I've done for 6, 7, 8 years at that point, I think. I didn't want to go back to getting a real job with like a boss and stuff like that. That's not for me. And I was getting married the following year as well. And I was thinking, I'm not going to be able to afford my wedding. And, it was a real, life-changing thing if I'd have failed that next standards check. And that was all because of my stubbornness of not changing. So I think it's important that we do reach out, and if there are people listening to this that feel like that, then you don't have to, it can be very isolating, lonely world, this, as a driving instructor, and you don't need to be.
That's a very, I guess, condensed version. I wasn't expecting the standards checks. Like you said, the first one, I guess, yeah, confident you've hit a spell of passes and you're always working for your students at the time, I guess. But then going into the second one, was that maybe a little bit of false confidence where I guess, did you maybe blamed the examiner for your first one? Did you take on any points, or you just keep doing what you was doing and going to the second one?
That's the power of arrogance. That's the power of believing your own hype. That I totally put it down to 100% that being that examiner, not being a nice examiner. Maybe they didn't like me. Yeah, it could have been anything. But I didn't take that on. I just thought, well, just a bad day with a bad examiner in a bad mood. So I'll go and do it again somewhere else. And that's the thing with part 3. You've got to understand it. And so many people don't understand it. Like, even now I'll take on trainee instructors that have kind of changed trainers, and they show me these kind of mock tests of oh, this is my part 3 mock test. And it's not right. You can just, when you look at the marking, it's not right. You can just tell it's been marked kind of line by line, and a lot of people feel that that's, or think that that's how it's marked. So either part 3 or standards check. It's not 17 competencies individually scored out of 3 and then added up at the bottom. They all kind of interlink, based on kind of key competencies, and then the rest of them have this kind of knock-on effect. So you've really got to understand it. And I didn't have any clue about it. I just thought it was the same as what we used to call the check test. I used to assume that it was that with a different name, because the DVSA are very good at coming up with all these big ideas that only last 5 minutes. The classic example of the last few years is, I'm not sure who it was, and I do hope that they were relieved of their post, who decided to change the name of examiners to enforcement officers. Because there's a bit of a divide between instructors and the DVSA. So let's bring everyone together by changing our name to some sort of scary bailiff figure. That'll bring us all together. What a good idea. And obviously they then realize that actually it's a stupid idea. So they've gone back to being examiners. So when the whole standards check thing came out, you've got to use coaching now. You've got to use client-centered learning techniques now. I'd say majority of the industry just went, right, okay, this will blow over. And now we're sat here 9 years on and it hasn't. And they were serious about it. And the thing about it is it's really good, the new way of doing things. And this is what I discovered, that when they came up with this idea, it was based on real education people coming into our industry and writing this national standard for driver and rider training. For all the bashing of the DVSA, including some from me already today, the one thing that they got absolutely spot on is that they didn't write the way forward. A lot of civil servants in an office in grey suits with grey beards deciding the way forward for us. They actually got proper education people in that totally knew what they were talking about in terms of educating people in modern techniques. And that was a masterstroke, really. But we don't all use them, and a lot of us still kind of do it the old way. We have this separation between the standards check or the part 3 and what I do every day. And you're just setting yourself up for failure if you do that, really, because imagine having to work this alien way for your test whilst under pressure. It's never going to end well, is it? We've still got a long way to go in the industry in terms of people buying into this new concept, because the old way and it's even in the job title, isn't it? We're instructors. Even that's outdated, because we're not there to tell people what to do. In fact, we will fail our standards checks and our part 3s if our sole form of education is opening up your learner's empty head and filling it with what you know. We'll fail for that, but we're still called instructors. So it's when this all came into the industry, it wasn't a new thing in other sectors of education. It was us that got left behind by everyone else. We still thought that telling people what to do worked, and loads of other education organizations had moved on, but sometimes decades ago, and we're there in 2014 telling people what to do, and it's not as effective as coaching people.
So what's been the difference, I guess, with your students from you having such a good run and then your standards checks came along? Have you noticed the difference with the outcome of students from your old ways, I guess, to the now coaching method opposed to what you was doing?
I think the end product is better. Back in sort of, pre-client-centered learning days, I think kind of, when was it? Like maybe 2011. I started off as a franchised instructor with the AA. And then I decided to take that leap on my own, right in the middle of the recession. which was another brilliant idea from me. And I was struggling to be an independent instructor who I'd only spent maybe a year, 18 months. So I didn't really have my name out there yet, in my local area. I should have perhaps stayed with the AA longer and built up my reputation more, but again, another mistake. I wanted my name on the top of the car. That was my main motivation. How egotistical is that? Another mistake. That's what I wanted, my name on the car. So I left the AA and then realized that I couldn't attract customers. So I had this idea. Now, I was in my mum's living room and I decided pass first time or free lessons forever. And it was ridiculously successful. Because at the time, my pass rate was kind of, I think 88, 89, 90%, something like that. So for me, for all the business that this brought in, if 1 out of 10 people are failing, I can take that hit, but look how full my diary is. So it was an educated, people used to call it a gimmick, which really upset me. But I thought it was great. And it worked for years and years. Absolutely fine. Some people failed. I gave them free lessons. They passed the second time. And it worked really well, but it made me even more focused on the test. And that was my problem. So to answer your question, that in terms of my pass rate, it stayed pretty much the same when I started using client-centered techniques and coaching, because I wasn't teaching people to pass a test. So even though my pass rate pretty much stayed the same, I think the end product is better. And this is what we should really always aim for in our industry, because it starts from the top. So if we've got really good driving instructor trainers, they will produce really good driving instructors that will in turn create really good learners, who will then in turn create safe drivers on the road that we share the road with every day. So I think that the end product is way better. The thing about telling people what to do as well, the old way instructing them, filling their head with what we know, is we create these little robots, these little robot people. And if you create little thinkers instead, they pass quicker, they learn quicker, and they pass quicker. But the end product is better. I'll give you an example. I was with someone, one of my PDIs, and the learner didn't signal when they were moving off at the side of the road. And my PDI said, "You've missed your signal there." And I said, "Why does he need to signal there?" She said, "Well, you've got to do your checks and then signal." It's like, dear, where's that written down? Where's the law for that? He did, loads of it. He did a full 360 sweep of his surroundings, and he decided to not signal because there was no one around. He's thinking. He's not being a little robot that after the blind spot we signal, and then after the signal we take the handbrake off. He's thinking for himself, which was brilliant. So that's what we need to create. And that's what coaching allows. The old method didn't. Because it was, I think what we tended to, what we still get this, but it was hopefully less now, is people, and I'll tell you what the phrase is that I can't stand, is you learn how to pass your test and then you learn how to drive after that. And that is because of the way we used to do the job. So, I mean, when I was learning to drive, it was about my mirrors, check your mirrors. I'm like, okay. And then after about maybe 10 hours, I said to my instructor, Steve, hi, Steve, if you're watching this. He said to me, I said to him, "Why do I have to keep checking that left mirror, Steve, before I turn left?" And he said, "Because you'll fail, Lee. You want to fail?" I'm like, what would I fail? So I kept doing it. And then once I passed my test, I didn't bother anymore, because I've passed my test now. So I'll do what I want. So we're not allowing people to understand risk and how to manage risk in the outside world. And that's all part of coaching, which is basically getting them to think rather than you doing their thinking for them.
Yeah, I've had a few situations like that where my students maybe done something that I've not mentioned, definitely moving off from the side of the road. And then all of a sudden they will. And I'm like, "Why have you done that?" And like, "We were pulling out from behind a car. So anyone that's coming down the road can see me." I'm like, "Cool, we've achieved something."
Yeah.
So I don't know, I'm trying, but obviously this show's allowing me to learn so much from so many different people. It's my head's about to explode with all everyone's information. It's great. Um, but your standards check, you had so much pressure riding on that. You've already mentioned that you maybe had a wedding to prep for, your business is on the line. You've gone from being, I guess, mega confident. So everything that you do, I guess you went into really confident. You've now got the prospect of losing your job, your business, a lot of things on the line. How did you prepare for that?
Well, I think, and this is, the majority of people that I get through ADI Doctor and PDI Doctor is people that were in that position. So the second fail has happened, and then the panic has set in. So like everybody else, I was scrambling around the internet. I was looking for people to save me. Basically, I was like, I need help now, quick. I've got 10 weeks. I need help now. So from that day, I kind of sorted myself out there on that second day, because I had a full day of lessons on that day, and my second standards check was in the morning, and I went home and I cancelled the rest of the week. And this was like a Wednesday, so I cancelled like tons of lessons. I don't want any more lessons. I want to learn stuff. And I went home and I started watching some random videos. And you've got to be so careful. There's so much misinformation that flies around. I mean, there's an old joke in our industry that is that if you've got 2 driving instructors sat in a room, you'll have 3 opinions. And now it's kind of, because of social media, it's multiplied by millions. It's like, right, you've got 1,000 instructors in a room with 5,000 opinions now. So for a PDI or an ADI that's looking for help, it's like a minefield, and I stepped on the right mine. I was very lucky. I met a man called Bob Morton, who is he's the lead trainer, I think, in the industry. What Bob Morton doesn't know isn't worth knowing. And I decided to invest in Bob, because I thought, I don't want to have all these voices. I want one voice. And out of these videos that I've watched this morning, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. So I blocked out everything else and just focused on Bob. And we're good friends now, strangely enough. But he was just the guy off Facebook, off YouTube. He was just, the first time I spoke to him, it was really weird, because it was like, I can't pause you or rewind you. You're real. It's like he was a real person. And before that, he was just a video guy, just a guy on YouTube. So I reached out to Bob. And the first time I spoke to him was in real life, was the night before my 3rd attempt. So I'd watched his videos on repeat over and over and over again for weeks and weeks. And then I plucked up the courage to email him, and he said, "Do you want to jump on a Zoom?" So I went on Zoom with him. I don't know if it might have been Skype, might have been back in the day, but it was something like this. And it was literally 12 hours before my career was about to end when I first spoke to him. And we just talked about what I was planning to do, and he gave me some tips, and I got through it. But that was, for me, that was the start then. I was like, there is no way I'm ever going to be in this situation again. So I didn't just stop there. I kind of spent a lot of money on working with Bob primarily over a course of a few years, and really everything that I help other people with now is based on that, being in that situation. And when people message me and reach out to me on Facebook or through my website, I can feel their pain, because I've been there. I know exactly how they feel, and I don't want them to feel like that. So I kind of just went on that journey then of self-development. And then that led me to start being, an ADI trainer, which took a lot of convincing. Again, that was, Terry, don't you? Terry and Bob basically teaming up on me saying, come on, you should do more. You've got all this knowledge that you've got. You need to do something with it. And I was like, and they basically talked me into it. And I've done that ever since, to a point now where my diary is so full with either PDI's normal, training part 2, part 3. But probably 60% of my diary is on Zoom, talking to people that are on that third attempt. Or, I love it when I get people that are really proactive. Like they'll email me and they say, "Oh, I'm only 2 weeks into my trainee license, and I'm looking for help." And I think that's amazing. That why can't I have been like that? You know what I mean? And I love working with them. It's like they're not getting comfortable. They're already thinking, "Oh, well, how can I get better?" And that's probably the biggest problem that I see, and it's kind of like a human nature thing. So there'll be people that are watching this and listening to this, that'll be in exactly the situation right now as they listen to it, which is they've done their training, so they've done their 40 hours of part 3 training, and there's your car, there's some learners, off you go, and then we're going to go and do some driving lessons now. And the biggest mistake they make is that they fall into the trap of figuring out a way of doing this job that works for them. But since that national standard for driver and rider training came out, it's almost like a uniform approach. It's almost like, if you go into Tesco in a different town, you know where the bread is. That's what the DVSA want. Whereas previously it was, I would do it my way and I'd get passes, and Joe Blogg's driving school on the next street works in a completely different way to me, but he gets passes, so everyone's happy. But when this national standard came out, it was like, you've got to use coaching, you've got to use client-centered techniques. This is what we want to see. And it's almost like people don't read that document, because they go out on this training license and they just wing it, basically. And the thing about winging it when it comes to teaching people to drive is it's really easy, because there are tons of ways of teaching people to drive successfully. But inevitably, in the end, there's only one way that the DVSA want to see you do it. So people tend to waste their trainee license, I think, because every single day of that trainee license should be prep for your exam, should be a practice for your exam. But because it's this kind of human nature thing, which is just go out and figure out a way of doing it, they fall into that trap of thinking that it's fine because nobody's there telling them it's not. And then the worst thing happens because they get passes. And as soon as they start getting a few passes, they start believing their own hype, just like I did. And they'll go, "Oh, I must be good then. I must be good at this because I'm getting passes." And then you turn up for the exam and everything you did was wrong. And it's like, what do you mean? What about all these passes I've had? What do you mean it's wrong? Maybe the examiner's just not a nice person. And then the cycle is starting again. So that's definitely a trap that people fall into.
Yeah, the first episode I've done on this, and this was kind of one of the things that maybe inspired me to do it and start reaching out to people, or just start this show. Whereas I think there's a bit of a trap as well with the franchise route, in that people, they have to deliver quite a few lessons for a lot of schools to cover cost and then try to make a living. And it's almost as if at times people don't have the time to train. They do the 40 hours delivered by whoever, and then they either have, I think it's 20% watched or 20 hours additional training. And from what I've seen, it's a little bit like at times it can be box ticking exercises, and people are missing that the PDI license is for you to train, opposed to start a new career. And
Yeah.
do you think people have time to train as well as doing everything else that they're doing? Or what's your thoughts?
This is going to sound harsh, but it's true. It's a reality that when you're coming into, if you're employed by somebody, then they have a duty of care to look after you. And a lot of people come into this industry from employment background, and they still expect people to do stuff for them. But the reality of being self-employed is that if you don't make it happen, it won't happen. So I speak to a lot of people and, "Oh, well, nobody ever told me that." It's like, well, why didn't you look for it? Why didn't you research that? Do you know what I mean? And that is the problem, I think. But the DVSA have always said about the trainee license that it's there for you to learn, not to earn. That's their little slogan with the trainee license. And it's true. But like I said, it's just human nature to go out and do that. But I mean, I work with AA and BSM, My Four Wheels, a few other driving schools as well, kind of local ones. And I see that regardless. That's not just a franchise thing. It's almost like let's try and get as much money as we can now. We're on, and people use the training license as a money spinner. What I try to get my PDIs to do, I say try, is when the learner gets out of the car, is I give them a reflection form. And all the questions are targeted based on the key competencies of the exam. And I always say to them that by the time you're out on the training license, it's not right or wrong anymore. It's you did it or you didn't do it, because that's how the DVSA are going to look at it on your exam. This is the criteria. This is what you did. If they match, then you pass. And if they don't, if it doesn't, then you don't. So I try to kind of keep their eye on the ball, in terms of, did you do this? Did you do that? What's your thoughts? If you didn't, then try and do it on your next lesson. So you're kind of policing yourself, I try to create that because it doesn't exist, and people don't police themselves. They're waiting for someone to do it for them. But you're self-employed now, and you've got to do it yourself. And I think that's the thing. I speak to a lot of people. I'm trying to think of an example, but I spoke to someone a few weeks ago, and there was something really obvious. I can't think what it was off the top of my head. And that was my first question, like, why haven't you looked it up? Why haven't you Googled it? How can you come into this not knowing that? And it's in your best interest to know this stuff. When I was coming into this, I question everything, and I think that helps. People just kind of, sometimes they don't, and it's like, I always say to my customers that if a silly question is the one that you didn't ask, because if you don't know it, you need to know it. That's why you're thinking it, so you should ask it. But I think to answer your question, I don't think it's directly linked to people having, because they've took on that franchise, by the way. They could have gone with a local driving school and took on a car for £60 and £60 a week, but they chose to take on that £200 a week franchise. It's up to them, isn't it? But I don't think it excuses not reflecting on your own performance. And I think a lot of PDIs they end up mothering too much. And I'll say to them, even people that have failed twice and they're looking for me to help them, I'm kind of booked up for I think it's about 6 weeks. So someone will message me and they'll say, I've got my exam at the end of July, let's say. And I say, well, I haven't got any availability in July, but I could squeeze you in at 7 o'clock on next Thursday, 7 o'clock in the morning. Oh, I can't do that. I've got a lesson. It's like, well, cancel it then, right? Because this is about you. Do you know what I mean? It's like we're caring too much about our learners, but we're not looking after ourselves. And like I said, as a self-employed person, if you don't look after yourself, nobody's going to do that.
And that was a big difference I found. So I failed my first part 3. And then from then until my second part 3, I was reflecting after every lesson around that. And it was something I wasn't doing beforehand. I was maybe a little confident. I come from a teaching background in the military, teaching different subjects. So I'm all right at teaching, coaching, instructing, and then failed my first part 3. And I'm like, uh-oh. And it was the reflection and I guess understanding and a lot of reading what was online and the groups that are out there. But yeah, reflection was a massive one, and being honest with yourself. Like, no, I didn't show this here. I didn't do this. I missed that. Rather than, yeah, I nailed that lesson, because there's always going to be an area we can improve. But I guess that's given me a different view on the training. And as a business, it's like, this has been one of the biggest lessons. You've got to work on yourself and your business and improve, because you can fall very easy into, I'm teaching all these people, they're passing the driving test, tick, done. And then it's probably going to catch up with you at some point.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's kind of like an ostrich thing. And this is again, that was my biggest mistake, that all this information came out about the standards check and part 3 and all this client-centered learning stuff. And they published it online, the DVSA, 2 documents in particular, the national standard, and there's another one, which is guidance for examiner tests and checks, the ADI one. And the amount of people that haven't read that, and basically it's a detailed document of all 17 competencies. It says, this is what we want to see. This is what competence looks like. And then underneath it, it says, this is what lack of competence looks like. And every single one of them 17 competencies are there. And people have never read it. And it's like, well, this test is a mystery. It's like, no, it's not. It's been publicly available online. All that guidance, you either didn't know it were there or you couldn't be bothered to look at it. And that's where I came from. So I was the same. So I was like, I knew it was out there, but I didn't read it because why do I need to change? Even the night before my standards check, I didn't care to look at it because I thought, I'll just do what I always do. And look how that turned out. And so I think that there is a lot of guidance out there, but people don't go for it. And they should, because it's in their own best interest to do that. But there's a lot of, I suppose it's the same with learners, isn't it? It's kind of, let's give it a go, see how we get on. It's like, I've got 3 goes, but 3 goes quickly becomes 2 goes. And once you fail that second one, that's a lot of pressure. I mean, I even spotted someone last year, again, I kind of not being informed and not knowing this. And we sat outside, we did a part 3 session the couple of days before a final part 3 attempt. And I were asking her sort of how she's feeling about it after we'd done the session. And she said, I'm so stressed about it all. I don't want to, if I fail, it's over. I said, well, what do you mean it's over? I said, well, once I failed my 3rd attempt, it's over, isn't it? My dream of being a driving instructor is over. It's like, well, it's not. She said, well, it is, isn't it? Because I have to wait 2 years. And, I can't hang around for 2 years. 2 years is a long time. I said, you do realize it's 2 years from when your part 1 runs out, not 2 years from tomorrow. And she's like, what? So when did your part 1 run out? She goes, in 8 weeks. And I said, well, the worst case scenario happens. You fail tomorrow. You spend the next 8 weeks training. You do your part 2 and you get that passed. And then you do your part 3 and then you've got 3 lives left again. And she said, I didn't know that. And she went and passed it the next day because that pressure wasn't on her anymore. But, and it's just little things like that. That's a good example. It's so important that you know what you're coming up against. My kind of bestseller Zoom session is a 1 hour session that targets the key competencies, because there's 17 competencies, but there's 4 really important competencies. And if you nail them, you pass, and if you don't, you fail. And it's really straightforward. But like I said, and I was not going to tell this story, but I'll say it. But I just won't name the driving school. I do training for a driving school that does kind of lesson footages. They watch footage of their PDIs and give them feedback on it. And I had a PDI over Christmas, and I went to see him, and he's not taken on the stuff he needs to. He's the classic example of he's just winging it. All the guidance and the framework that we put down in his training is kind of wishy-washy now, and he's basically just doing it the way that works for him. And I said this to him. I said, look, you need to crack on with some more training. And then there was this video, this footage review video, and the training company watched it and they marked it as if it was a part 3 and scored him 48. Which wasn't reflective of what I saw when I sat in the next day. So I watched that video because he sent it me, and I scored it as 24. And when I looked at the marking of it, it had been marked line by line. So we looked at the first competency, we scored it out with 3. Then the second one, scored it out with 3. Got to the bottom, added them up, which isn't the way it's marked. So when I marked it the way it was marked, I came out with 24. So I said to him, look, I really think in January we should crack on and get some more sessions in. And because he's watched this video, he thinks I'm just trying to grab money off him now, doesn't he? Because he's 48. He's an A grade. He's an A grade PDI. Why does he need more help? And he didn't take any training in January. And then on the 1st of February, he failed with 23. And I was so angry. I was so furious. And I sent a WhatsApp message to the boss of this driving school, national driving school. And I was really upset with it because it's like they've given false hope. He got false hope. And it wasn't right. So I went to pick up this parcel. I was in, the Royal Mail collection thing, big queue. And I was on my phone, like typing this angry WhatsApp message, just airing how I felt about it all. And I got to the front of the queue and I pressed send. And I was like, oh, I'm in trouble now. So I am known for kind of speaking my mind. So I thought, can I undo that? And I saw the little ticks, read it now. And then I had this parcel, took it to my car, and I opened it up, and it was a bottle of champagne and a card from that driving school to congratulate me on the ADI of the Year thing. So my next message was, thanks for my card, after this really angry message. But that just highlights it. That's an example of, that's a national driving school that didn't seem to know how the form was marked. So bad advice. And going back to the ADI one, the examiners tests and checks, there's so much stuff that flies around on Facebook and YouTube. You have to give a speech about risk management at the start of the exam. No, you don't. You used to back in the day. There was one.
I forgot to do that on my final part 3. Just to interject, at the beginning, there's someone else in the back of the car. What's going to change? I forgot to do that. We hit with what we was going to go and work on, and off we went. And that was my second one, passed with a half decent score. But my first one, I was very much risk and do this step, do that step, do the other step, and it didn't quite go to plan on the first one.
It's so silly because people, and this is a respected trainer on YouTube saying this stuff. He's got a big following. He or her or them have a big following, and it was just garbage what was coming out of his mouth about how you need to give this speech about risk management, how you need to mention this, and this will help you perform well in risk management. But the reality is, the examiner listens to that speech and thinks, "Nice speech." But I'm still going to judge you on your risk management after you leave this car park, strangely enough. So it's just, silly little things like that. But the guidance is really good. And then if the guidance doesn't make sense, you can get someone like me to sort of translate it into like plain English. If you don't kind of get what it means, you can ask questions about it. But I think that's the problem with part 3, especially part 3, is that people don't know what they're going into. They don't understand what a good lesson looks like in the eyes of the DVSA. If they, and it can come from their trainer as well. So their trainer might impose their thoughts on what a good driving lesson is to that PDI. So that by default, that's what a good driving lesson looks like now to me. But it might not necessarily be in line with the national standard for driver and rider training. So that's why them documents are out there, so you can get it from the horse's mouth. And probably the biggest, most common mistake is kind of making it about you, which sounds weird for me to say that in a negative because it is about you, but it's about you being about your learner. It's not about you. There's a section on top of the marking form that I always talk about on Zoom, and it says lesson theme, and in there it's got little boxes like effective use of mirrors and rural roads and dual carriageways. And PDIs, especially PDIs, look at that and they go, right, got to pick a lesson theme. And then they try to shoehorn a learner into a lesson theme. And then they do an exam where all 17 competencies are based on your ability to identify your learner's needs and to make plans to alleviate those needs. And we end up with situations where we're doing roundabouts. It's like, why are we doing roundabouts? Oh, I like teaching roundabouts. Right. Who are you taking? Oh, I'm taking my wife. She a learner? No, she's full license holder. So we're now doing a lesson topic that we don't need to do because wife's pretty good at roundabouts. And we're taking a full license holder with no experience of teaching full license holders. I'm all right because I do this, but PDI, sometimes the PDI's thought process is, well, if I take a full license holder, they're not going to make any mistakes, so I'm going to pass. It's like, no, you're not, because you've got no experience at all at delivering a driving lesson to a full license holder. It's a completely different level of thing. It's advanced stuff, because there's kind of 4 questions that the examiners ask themselves before they mark your form. So they take the notes into the test center and they put the notes in front of them and they say, right, was it safe? And if it wasn't, then they don't bother with the other 3 questions because you failed for risk management. But as long as it was safe, then, was it relevant? Did learning take place? And was it value for money? So if you take someone, doesn't matter whether they're a full license holder or a learner, you need to target the things that are relevant to them. You need to make sure learning takes place, and there has to be evidence of this, and it needs to be valued for money. So if you take your wife and do roundabouts, your wife's good at roundabouts. How much did she learn today? Was it value for money? It's like, well, no, you failed then. Do you know what I mean? And the safety issue is a big thing, because if you choose a subject that you like to teach and the learner doesn't have the knowledge or the understanding or the skill set to do that subject, then it's going to go, wrong pretty quick, and that tends to what happens. And then people fail for risk management because they're subjecting the learner to all this chaos, because we're doing my favorite subject, but ultimately, if the lesson is right for the learner and the practice area is right for the learner and the level of help is right for the learner, it's not chaos. In fact, it's safe. So we tick that first box. In terms of the relevance, sometimes it's never relevant. It was never relevant. So if you pick a subject that you want to teach, then it's never relevant. But even if you've identified the learner's needs properly, people then fall into the second trap, which is they stick to the plan. And what I always say to everyone for standards check, my last message that I always send to them is plan to change your plan. Because you could make a brilliant, if you say your exam starts at 10 o'clock, you could make a perfect plan based on the needs of your learner, but you haven't made a plan for their needs at 5:10 because you've not got a crystal ball. And we tend to kind of use routes and stuff. So we're going to have a 40-minute route. We have this route planned out, but that route was based on their existing needs. But when their needs change, the plans need to change, and most likely the practice area needs to change as well. You need to create this kind of flowing, fluid, evolving thing. So then it might start relevant, but 5 minutes later it might not be. And then if you're not working on the things that are relevant, then learning doesn't take place and it's not value for money. So it always affects those questions in the end.
There's a lot of things there that I sat nodding my head, because my first one that I failed made it about me, showed the examiner all this stuff that I knew, and the student had no idea what was going on. So it really wasn't a good one, my first part 3. And then, from looking at what everyone was saying online and reflecting on my lessons and understanding, I'd not been through the GDE. I've been through bits now. I've not read all of it, but just little bits to understand it for my students, from the examiner's point of view. But having that understanding, especially of the 17 competencies and how they all work together, like the risk management, exactly what you said. I'll give this brief at the beginning in your 3-minute exactly brief before you leave the test center, and then you're all right. I think, being more dynamic and changing as the lesson changes is good. But going back to then, so mistakes. Students are making mistakes on a lesson. Let's say it's a part 3 or a standards check scenario. I found that as long as they're safe and controlled, that's where learning can take place. What's your thoughts on that with students when we're teaching a lesson? If there are mistakes happening, do you prioritize them if there's a couple of mistakes? What tends to be your thought with that?
I mean, going back to what we said earlier, is you should always, there should be no difference to what you do on a normal day to your exam. Otherwise you're not preparing yourself for it.
Yeah.
So, like I say, you need to make sure that, whenever you do a lesson and on a normal day or at the start of your exam, it's the same thing. That lesson needs to be based on your learner's priority needs. So that often comes from the lesson before, doesn't it? So you've done your debrief and you've said, what goals did you achieve today? What goals did you not? In light of today, what do we need to look at next time as a priority? And that would then default to that's what we're going to work on, at the start of the next lesson. So you've identified a need, but needs change and mistakes create new needs. So if a serious fault happened, that should always really, as a rule, default to now your learner's priority need, because you didn't make a plan to work on that 10 minutes ago, but because it hadn't happened yet, and now it has. So that would then default. So I think if you're always working on your learner's priority need, then by nature, this plan's going to change and adapt throughout the lesson anyway. It's going to happen naturally, because you'd look at it and go, well, that's what we were working on, but now that's happened. And if you weigh these two things, whoa, this one's heavier in terms of risk and in terms of importance. So we need to work on that now, because that's more important than the thing at the start. And then we can deal with that, and then we could perhaps go back to the thing that was happening before. And reoccurring faults are the same. If a serious fault happened, that would be the default thing. But in terms of driving faults, like if if your learner is consistently stalling at a junction, we tend to, and it's this kind of old school kind of basing things on topics that kind of distracts us. But we're working on T-junctions. That's what we're working on. So we'll keep working on the T-junctions, and your learner's needs are clutch related. It's happening at a T-junction because they're at one, but they are bad with their clutch. So their need is to improve their clutch control. So if you go away and improve clutch control and then bring them back to a T-junction, then magically they don't stall now, because look, they're not better at T-junctions, they're better at using the clutch. So I think it's important, and that's where the GDE highlights that you need to make sure your learner has the skills and the knowledge and the understanding before you use them in a topic, because all the topic is previously known skills and knowledge and understanding put in a certain order to do this new task. The one that I see quite a lot is learners stalling at a T-junction, or bringing the clutch up too quick and then steering too fast, or having to steer like mad because the car's gone too fast. But there's two skills involved there. There's the clutch control, which is creeping the car forward, and there's also being able to turn the car 90 degrees by using the steering wheel. But when you get your learner to do that at a T-junction, they have to coordinate both of those skills at the same time. So it's not enough to have the skills separately. They need to have the coordination of the two skills together. And if they can't creep the car forward and steer at the same time and keep the car at like 2 miles an hour in a big empty car park, there's a good chance that they won't be able to do it at a T-junction. So it makes sense to get that skills and then the coordination of the skills, done first. And then we have those tools we need for the topic. And the standard check and the part 3 reflects that as well, where, a lot of the feedback that I see when people send me their forms is that you should have scaled it back, and you're doing T-junctions, so we're going to keep doing T-junctions. And it's like, well, you can't really achieve your T-junction goals with someone who can't set off properly. So that's their need. Need to go and work on their needs. And then adapting the plan when appropriate, that is what I call the killer competency on the form. It's the 4th one in lesson planning. If you get a 1 in there, you're pretty much going to get, 7 1s on your form, because of the other ones that it has that knock-on effect in. So, every form that I look at, it's pretty much a 1 is a fail, a 2 is a B, and a 3 is an A, in terms of that was a lesson plan adapted competency, because of the knock-on effect it has. It's like dominoes. And it's because something happened, but you just stuck to the plan. And I think the biggest issue that happens is this kind of tunnel visioning mindset, which is we overplan. So we're planning this exam for weeks. We know where we're going to take them. We know the subject we're going to do. We might not have decided the learner yet, but we know what subject we're going to do and we know what route we're going to do. So when these new mistakes happen, you might stop and you might talk about them. You might talk about risk, and you might talk about solutions and trying to get to the bottom of the cause and stuff like that. But then it's having that conversation is almost like an inconvenience, because like we had this route, we have this plan for today, so we'll talk about it and then we'll just sweep it under the rug and we'll carry on doing roundabouts. And that leads to probably the most common fail that I see, where we're not looking at it going, well, we were working on roundabouts, but this thing is happening now. And if this keeps happening, that's the problem. So we need to kind of adapt and work on this and then use that skill at roundabouts. So it's, I think, if you always focus on your learner's skills and then you use those skills in the traditional topics, it always works a lot better. And it's also good practice for what you'd have to do on your exam, which is if there is a need, you need to address that need rather than just be tunnel visioned by this topic that you've decided to work on.
Why do you think it's so common then that people are, I don't know, I guess, worrying more about the topics than the skills? Because the pass rate's not great for part 3. It's at just over 30%, and it's been at around that for a long time with not much change, really. Do you think people are misinterpreting it? Do you think the trainers are maybe missing the information that needs to be passed on to people, or people just struggle with the test on the day?
It's probably a mixture of all of it. Because you could look at trainers, and that's where my thought process goes to straight away. And I think, well, if the trainers are not preparing these people for this exam, if they're not preparing them for exactly what is in store, because that seems to be the biggest thing I notice, is that people didn't have a clue what they were doing. So is that the trainer's fault? But then I also get my PDIs who go on the test and fail, and they don't seem to know what they're doing. So I can't sort of point fingers at other people when I have PDIs that do the same thing. I had a PDI that failed today, and she has had a lot of training, but she fell into all the traps that I spend all day telling people about. So I don't think I'm to blame there, or maybe I am. Maybe it was just the pressure of the day. When she saw the examiner, I think it's the same examiner she got on at part 2, which she doesn't like. There is an examiner around here that not many people do like, and it happened to be her. And she said that kind of swayed me straight away. And you can totally get that, can't you? You can understand that. So I think it's a little bit of all. I don't think it's all trainers' faults, but I do think a lot of trainers don't know what they're doing properly. They don't understand the exam. They maybe knew all about the old one, but maybe they haven't updated their own CPD, and maybe they're not as on the ball as they used to be in terms of what this new test entails. And maybe it's just this kind of, from the PDI's point of view, maybe it's just what they thought they were coming into, because that's how they were taught. We're going to teach moving off and parking up, and then we're going to teach left side roads, and then we're just going to teach a lot of topics, regardless of whether these people that you're training have the skill set, knowledge, and understanding to do that topic. So I think it's a little bit of everything. I think it's maybe PDIs not taking in as much information as they should from the trainers. I think it's PDIs not doing their own research and expecting people to tell them what to do when they're being self-employed. I think it's the pressure on the day as well. But like I said, there's no point me sitting here saying that, it's other trainers' faults, because, I make damn sure everyone knows exactly what's in store, and then I get results like I did today. You know what I mean? I've also had 4 other people pass today, but that's what I'm talking about because it upset me. But yeah, I don't think it's not all down to the trainers, but I think there is quite obviously a lot of trainers that haven't updated their understanding of the exam as well.
So there's obviously like different trainers are going to do different things. Let's hope I can get them all on here one day to share their views. But something that you must have nailed down coming into your third standards trek then was dealing with the pressure. The first two, like you say, was maybe confident. And you said you watched a lot of YouTube videos and then ended up reaching out to Bob Morton. But how did you deal with the actual pressure and the stress of the day? What did you do to prepare for that, given what was on the line?
Um, I don't think I dealt with the pressure very well. I just think I knew exactly crystal clear what I needed to do. I knew what I needed to do. I knew what I didn't need to do. And, when you understand the exam, you know what the criteria is that they're looking for. There was an incident literally in the last 5 minutes of that lesson where the guy that I took, the learner, almost did me in the end. We were practicing, and this is the old format of the exam. So it was like an hour long, and you could teach new subjects. There's another question that I get quite a lot. People fail the part 3, and because the examiner said, well, what do you mean you're teaching them to move off at the side of the road? No, you're not. Nobody told me that. Nobody told me you weren't allowed to teach a new subject. Well, why didn't you find out? And this was back when you could. And he took a right turn into a side road when there was an oncoming car, and I had to jump on the dual controls last minute. And I thought, if I hadn't have braked, my job's over. So, and I scraped through it, absolutely scraped through it, because when you've been doing and this is more of an ADI thing than a PDI thing, when you've been doing the job as long as I had been doing, and this is not as long as other people, I've been doing it for 6 years, the old way. You can't change how you work in 10 weeks. Do you know what I mean? I had to put a lot of thought into what I was doing to not do what I do in autopilot. You know what I mean? I haven't quite got to that point yet where I was kind of consciously kind of just doing it, unconsciously doing it. I was thinking a lot about how to do it. So I kind of scraped through it, to be fair. But in terms of the pressure, it was just, I think the pressure can kind of focus the mind. I think it depends on the person. Some people kind of, wilt under it. And for me, it was just, it's all I was thinking about for weeks. And I didn't sleep that night before. And I was like, laser focus on exactly what you need to do. So I think it's not a situation that anyone would ever want to be in. It's horrible. But like I said, in fairness, I scraped it. I got through third time just. And I think, when I was speaking to Bob that night before, he kind of reassured me and said, you won't lose your job. You just lose your badge and then you requalify. And by the time you've requalified, you'll be better, won't you? And I was like, oh, yeah. And I'm the night before going, I'm going to lose my job. And it's like, it's not true. You won't. You can literally go around as many times as you want. You'll probably give up. But there's no limit on how many times you can go around. So when it comes to the third attempt, I think that's a realization that a lot of people need to have, which is, if you tell yourself stuff like my dreams are over if I fail, then that builds the pressure even more. And it's not true. It's not true at all. So I think I'd kind of, by the time it came around, I'd thought, I'm going to give it a go. And if I fail it, I'm going to do a shed load of training with Bob and I'm going to smash it next time. And in the end, I'll be a better ADI because of that experience. But it was still scary.
Yeah, I can imagine so. So I guess you just use that, like you said, and the pressure, I guess, helped you, along with knowing. So with the going round again, it's not the end of the world, but there's obviously lost earnings there. What advice do you tend to give people that are maybe in the position that you was in now? Other than that, we can always go again, do it again. Some people financially, it's going to be extremely difficult to go through the process again. What advice do you give to people in that situation?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've actually been in that situation where I've had to, because I've never had someone that's failed, 3 times and had to do that, because my focus is always, we're going to do it. But I think, maybe if it did come up in conversation, it'd be just making them feel that it's not the end of the world and you could come back to it, and I suppose they would have to, I mean, so as it depends on your financial situation, doesn't it? If you've got, a spouse who's, full-time working, you could do something else, part-time or what. It depends on your situation. Really, when you're coming into this industry and you know that qualification is not guaranteed, then really, as someone that's going to be self-employed, you should have a plan anyway, shouldn't you? You should have a backup plan. So I probably wouldn't give any advice other than, don't assume you're going to qualify first time around, and to have a backup plan for if plan A doesn't work.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know how big the backlog is for standards checks now. I've not had mine now. I know there's people that have been a few years out. So they're going to be coming around to get more standards checks in, I'm sure. So what advice do you give people in preparation for? I know you said you've had, what, 4 or 5 PDIs do their part 3 today?
Yeah.
What apart from what we've already said, is there any kind of common messages you give to people that
apart from change the plan?
Getting very nervous, because I was horrendous the day before mine.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's preparation, because there's 2 things that make people nervous. One is this kind of a kind of sense of nervousness that's kind of not real. It's kind of you build it up in your head, and actually it's not that much of a big deal. The other one is a kind of a lack of confidence in yourself. So there's kind of there's the people like Diane Hall are really, really good at dealing with that psychological side of it, when it's when it's a irrational fear or irrational nerves. Then you can only deal with it that way, kind of psychologically. But a lot of people are nervous because they don't feel that they're ready. So why are you doing the test? I speak to a lot of PDIs that say, I'm not sure whether I should go for it or not. It's my second attempt. I'm not sure whether I might just give it a go, but I'm sure. And I just say, well, what advice would you give to a learner who'd just failed a mock test, failed the real test, or failed a mock test and the test was next week? What would you say? He said, well, I'll tell them to cancel it. Take your own advice then. Because, and like I said, it's important that you have that crystal clear knowledge of exactly what you're coming into. And again, if you don't, then I think everyone's to blame. I think your trainer maybe could have done more. I think you could have done more yourself to find stuff out. Looking at the groups on Facebook isn't really preparing you for it, because it's just confusing it. Like I said, it's a minefield. There's just so many different opinions. There's people that contradict me and I contradict other people. Who's right? Who knows? You know what I mean? And it's like, when you've got people, that are well known in the industry and they don't agree with each other, well, that's really confusing, isn't it? Because you think everyone that knows what they're doing would agree with each other, but no, they don't. So it's a bit of a minefield. But I think that's the key thing, is to put it into perspective. If it was your first go, see it as a free hit. And it's like standards check. It's like, it's not the dreaded standards check. I'm waiting for the dreaded email. It's like, if you think of it like that, you're going to be nervous about it. You're going to build it up in your head as this scary thing. If you see it as free CPD, then actually it's a positive thing, isn't it? Because you're either going to pass it, which is great, or you're going to fail it. You've not paid for that exam. You've failed it, and you've been given, good feedback from the examiner at the end. This is what your shortcomings were. So what you do with that now is up to you. But if I had a list of shortcomings, I'd go and work on them and get them better. And then I'd go back and then pass the second time. But like I said, when I did that originally, I had this list of feedback from the examiner. I thought, you just don't like me. And that's going back to right at the start what we said today. It's so easy to believe your own hype and think that everyone else is the problem and not you. But I'd say that's what you need to do, is you need to have a completely crystal clear, knowledge of exactly what competence looks like to the DVSA and what a lack of competence looks like. And like I said, that's been publicly available since 2014 online.
So that's the GDE.
No, that's
where that's in
no, that's
national.
the ADI1 document. It's
Okay.
called I think it's called something like the Guidance for Instructor Tests and Checks. And it's a really long document, but there is a section specifically for Part 3 and Standards Check. And it goes through all the competencies. This is what we want. This is what we don't want. And read that instead of listening to Karen on Facebook, because it's from the horse's mouth is always my advice.
Make sure you've watched this video first.
Yeah, watch this video first. But yeah, always read them documents. The National Standard for Driver and Rider Training and the ADI1 is really important, that you know what you're coming into then. I mean, I speak to a lot of PDIs, or in fact, I get a lot of PDIs through the national driving schools. And the first question I always ask them is the first question my trainer asked me, which is, why do you want to be a driving instructor? Because I'm a bus driver and I like driving, is a very common answer. It's like, well, you do realize this isn't a driving job. It's more like you're a teacher in a classroom, but that classroom is on wheels and it moves at 30 miles an hour. That's what you just
signed up.
Yeah, that's what you signed up for, not a driving job. Because I don't know why it is taxi drivers and bus drivers do that. They sort of think, well, I could get more money doing that. Less hours, more money. So let's go and do that. It's like a step up from a bus driving job. It's like, it's completely not like that at all. So I think, it's very revealing that some of the answers people give me. And you can tell straight away, that they think it's maybe how it was when they were learning to drive. I'm just going to tell them what to do and tell them where to go, and that's it. It's like you are an educator. Yeah, you're there to educate people. You're not there to just tell them what you think or what you know, because that's not how people learn.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it definitely isn't less hours and more pay. There's some long days, as we can see here.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of people that I've spoke to since starting the show have all kind of said the same about understanding the different publications that are out there, understanding what the examiners are looking for. And I guess, I mean, I've made it through the process without that in-depth knowledge that I need to go and get before I have too many more people, and at least then I can pretend I know what I'm talking about. But it's certainly interesting that everyone's saying, get this information, read these publications. And that's one thing I will be doing as soon as the phone stops. What other are there any other common things that you see that people are falling short on that you think can be fixed without too much training? Does that make sense? Just common misconceptions that people have. Yeah,
I think generally the common misconception of the job really is that you're this kind of headmaster role. So it's like, and this is a conversation I always have with people starting Part 3, is that you're not the headmaster. You're not this dominant force in the car. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is where we're going to go. A modern driving instructor needs to see themselves as a butler figure, which is, how can I help you? What do you need from me? Kind of thing. And if you have that mindset, it makes it really easy. But if you come in it to the mindset of this kind of domineering sort of authority figure, then it makes it really hard, because you won't use coaching and you won't use client-centered techniques and you won't ask questions. Something like, at the end of a lesson, if you said to a learner, is there anything I've done today that you particularly liked, or anything that I did that didn't really work for you? They might say, we've got that diagram out for 10 minutes, I don't really, get diagrams. I'm more of a kind of, let's give it a go and see how we get on kind of person. And you're thinking, oh, great. Well, that's good information. So next lesson or next time we introduce a new thing, I won't use a diagram. So you can learn how to tailor your, how you teach to how they learn. Before all this, when I was I like I said, we said at the start, didn't we, that if you're like a visual, if you learn visually, then you tend to default to teaching visually. So I'm a very visual learner, so my default teaching style was visual, and I'd have someone in the car and I'd been showing them this. Back in the day it was like laminated diagrams, then it went to using my iPad, and sometimes people would be really engaged in it, and sometimes people would be looking out the window, and my thought process for them were, you're just rude, look at this diagram. And it's that kind of pointing the finger of blame, outwards instead of turning it around again. That person that was staring out the window was probably not a visual learner. So if I'd have said to them in that butler role, how would you want to go about this? I don't know. Well, do you want to watch me do it first, or do you want to look at it on a diagram? Or do you want me to talk you through it? Or do you just want to have a go at it and I'll keep you safe? And when you do that, they will choose the way that it works best for them. So for everyone who would be completely horrified of the idea of having a go on their own, can you talk me through it? Yeah, of course I can. There'll be someone else that thinks you talking them through it is patronizing. And when you're going, mirror, signal, brake, they're going, it's just a voice in my ear. Just, you're actually making it harder because I can't concentrate with your voice going, blah, 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 blah. And when I used to get people like that back in the day, when they couldn't listen to full instruction, I would just think they're stupid. Like, you just listen and follow. It's not difficult. Is probably what I'd say. But I'm teaching them a way that they don't like to learn. And that's when we mentioned about the school of mum and dad. They don't have these skills that we have. They just find the way that works for that person, which is what we should be doing. And that's why the pass rate didn't go down.
That's something that I need to do more of. You've reminded me now, I guess. When I was preparing for part 3, I was constantly asking my students, I was teaching for free. So there was always what can I do better? Trying to get the real-time feedback of the student to prepare me for my part 3. And I was doing it after that as well. But hearing you mention it now, it's certainly something I need to revisit and keep an eye on to make sure that I'm not missing any of my students that maybe don't learn best from what I'm trying to do, and get their feedback every lesson because it's about them. That's interesting. Something that I've not been doing recently, at least.
I mean, it's in your best interest because if you know how to learn, then you can then develop them quicker. And then your pass rate goes up and your waiting list goes up and your prices go up because people are passing faster. So it works, for everybody, really. I think another sort of misconception as well is people don't really understand client-centered learning. They confuse it with client-led, and there's a big difference that, if people's sort of understanding of client-centered learning is, well, we have to do what they want. But you should always kind of think of it as you've got, instruction on one side and you've got coaching on the other side. And it's like a swinging pendulum. So the more risk there is, the more you would instruct. And the less risk there is, the more you would coach. And it's constantly swinging this pendulum. So you don't have to be one or the other. You just have to apply the right one when it's appropriate. So if you had a learner, stalling, say they were waiting to turn right in the middle of a box junction at a traffic light, and the light turned back to red. So they needed to clear the junction and they stalled. You're not going to sit there and go, so do you think you could figure out how to move the car from here? You just tell them to get into first and come on. So the pendulum would swing towards risk. But also it's like, the example I always use is a really silly example, but it makes the point really simplistically that, if your learner had the first lesson and they got up to 6 miles an hour, and then the second lesson they got in and said, I want to do motorways today. Then, if you're being client-led, you'd go, right, okay, let's go motorway. If you're being client-centered, you'd say, well, what's the fastest speed we've done so far? And they'd go, well, 6, right? And how fast do you need to go on a motorway? 70. So would it make sense to maybe do like 10 and 20 and then build up to the point where you're comfortable doing 70? And, 9 out of 10 learners will say, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? But you might get one that goes, nope, I want to do motorways. And then within client-centered learning, you can say, on this occasion, I'm going to have to insist that we do this instead. And it's that, and that's still client-centered, where some people think, well, how is that client-centered? Because you're choosing what to do. But it's not, because you should always think that you're wearing this hat when you're sat in the car that says client-centered instructor on the front, and on your back seat you've got another hat that's called the guardian of safety hat. And if you have to reach into the back and put that hat on, you can't see your client-centered hat because it's underneath. It's this guardian of safety hat is bigger than the other one. So if you have to be the guardian of safety, you ain't client-centered. We can insist that we don't do that. And I think that's important to remember, that client-centered learning is not all about them doing what they want, because that would be client-led.
So I guess the difference then, from the sounds of it, I might be wrong, is client-centered learning is more about the student's needs opposed to the student's wants.
Yeah. Yeah, and no. I mean, we talked about always focusing on the priority. So the way I explain that to PDIs is that, you've got, being client-centered is about taking in your learners' thoughts and them being actively involved in stuff, not being told they're going to get prompts. Do you want me to talk you through it? Do you want to try it on your own? Do you want me to prompt you? Can you prompt me? That's being client-centered. You say, I'm going to give you prompts. That's not, because you're just telling them what's going to happen. But it's just kind of down to the risk side of things. It's making sure that they're actively involved in the conversation, but ultimately in your role as guardian of safety, that sometimes you can overrule that. And you can insist that they don't do it. I mean, I'll give you another example. Like if you've got a learner who wants to look at traffic lights today, turning right at traffic lights, that's what I want to do. But last lesson, you used dual controls for an oncoming car when they were turning right into a basic side road, then that's their needs, isn't it? And actually, without that ability to turn right into a side road and give way to one oncoming car, we're probably not going to be able to give way to 20 oncoming cars at a traffic light, because that's kind of like the big version of that, isn't it? But to answer your question, you've kind of got to find that priority need. So you can take in what your learner wants, and you can take in what you think they need to work on. And it's important to remember that you're always the one that will identify their needs better than them, because you're the trained professional, but they're always in a position better than you to identify what they want, because they live in their head and you don't. But it's about putting that list of all the needs and the wants together and ranking them in order of importance. And the one that lives at the top is the priority. And that's what you should be working on. And then once your lesson starts, if something else becomes the priority need, then we're going to work on that instead. But because the learner is actively involved, that it's client-centered.
Yes, thank you very much for that. There's so much information in this that we've been through, and out there as well, which is good. Certainly opened my eyes to a few things, and hopefully it helps other people that are out there. We've been on a little while now. Is there anything else you want to add, get out there, share what you're up to, what services you offer?
Yeah. So as I've said during the session, I sort of primarily now I'm a full-time trainer for ADIs and PDIs. So I have my twins, so adidoctor.co.uk and pdidoctor.co.uk. I've also got an ADI Doctor Facebook group as well that people can jump in and not get judged, which is nice, refreshing change for Facebook groups. And if, like I said, the advice is always the same. It's go and read the national standard for driver and rider training. Go and read the advice that the examiners get for conducting driving tests for instructors. And then if you're unsure about what that stuff means, then reach out to people that know and can translate that, which I can do. and there's lots of other really, really good trainers that can do that. And it's important that you find someone that's not going to give you their opinions, but is going to give you the guidance that the DVSA set, because it's kind of dangerous to tell someone your opinion that might not necessarily be right. Do you know what I mean? So it's important that you go to somewhere where you'll be told facts, not opinions.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for your time tonight as well.